1947 is a year defined by a brutal paradox. The Indian subcontinent finally secured its independence from the British Empire, but the price of that freedom was the violent, chaotic loss of a united nation. The despair among the new leadership was immediate and overwhelming. In a broadcast to the nation, he was reacting to the fallout of the Radcliffe Award. The hastily drawn borders through Punjab and Bengal triggered immediate mass communal violence. Over 10 million refugees were forced to flee in opposite directions across the new borders to escape the slaughter. The Indian Constitution functions as a desperate survival mechanism, engineered in the darkest days of the region's modern history. The British withdrawal was abrupt. Lord Mountbatten accepted the role of viceroy on one strict condition: there had to be a firm, unescapable timeline for the complete transfer of power. No extensions. That hard deadline handed the massive task of state building over to a specific, English-educated Indian elite, leaving them to fill a sudden and massive power vacuum. The intellectual foundation for this exact group traces back to Lord Macaulay's 1835 Minute. By redirecting state funds to English education, the British inadvertently created the shared language and political framework these leaders would eventually use to articulate their constitutional demands. Now, this exact class of leaders had to instantly pivot. They went from spending decades agitating against an empire to architecting a new republic, all while the country was actively tearing itself apart. This brings us to the Preamble. Because it lays out the grand ideals of the republic, most people assume its soaring rhetoric acts as binding law. Its legal status has been intensely contested. Interpreting the founders' intentions proved so difficult that the highest court in the land reversed its own opinion on what the Preamble even is. In the 1960 Berubari Union case, the Supreme Court explicitly ruled that the Preamble is not legally part of the Constitution at all, meaning it confers zero substantive power to the state or its citizens. But 13 years later, in the landmark case of Ananda Bharati case, the Supreme Court entirely reversed its stance, officially ruling that the Preamble is, in fact, part of the Constitution. The country's founding paragraph is so complex that it took decades of litigation just to confirm it belonged in the book. Even the first three words, "we the people," require a second look. The Constituent Assembly that drafted the document was never elected by universal adult franchise. It was a select group. Their legal authority to write the rules didn't come from a direct public referendum. It was explicitly granted to them by the Indian Independence Act of 1947. The Preamble's four main objectives require strict boundaries. Liberty defines a narrow list of rights, heavily restricted to maintain public order. Equality of status and opportunity constitutionally abolishes systemic inequalities like untouchability. Fraternity remains aspirational. No text can legally enforce brotherly feeling. The Preamble restates the nation's existential questions in grand rhetoric, leaving the massive architectural body of the Constitution to solve them. Because of the immediate trauma of partition, the framers left absolutely nothing to chance. They wrote down every operational detail they could think of, resulting in the longest written constitution in the world. To build quickly, they borrowed proven mechanics for this structural blueprint: a parliamentary model from the UK, fundamental rights from the US Bill of Rights, directive principles from Ireland, and a strong federal center from the 1935 Act. The result is a highly pragmatic Frankenstein's monster, a careful blend of rigid rules and flexible amendment procedures, engineered specifically to survive extreme political stress. The Indian Constitution operated as heavy machinery built to hold a fractured subcontinent together. We know how the pieces were assembled to get the machine running, but how do these gears actually turn in practice? Next time, we dive deep into Part 3 of the document, the fundamental rights, and explore exactly what happens when the government tries to take those rights away.